Hey, Steelers Nation, it's Joe Rockey with the Pittsburgh Syndicate. The big news today, obviously, is Quan Alexander being signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm going to break this down in the larger trends of the team in the offseason and a couple of specific ways in this episode. First, the overall trend that this shows that Con has been doing throughout the entire offseason. There's two of them I'm going to hit on. And then third is going to be the depth at the linebacker room overall with Alexander in it. So the first thing that Con showed this offseason was that he is not afraid of two very big fears that a lot of the league has. And, this is an opportunity to advance as the rest of the league is scared and retreating. And those opportunities are, we have signed roughly roughly 3/4 of our signings this year were injured and missed significant amount of time last season or have significant injury histories in their past. And this is something that the Pittsburgh Steelers have not been afraid to address. When we look at the three top linebackers on the depth chart, each of them had injury risk and injury situations last season. Herbig being another example, who was signed to be the starting left guard before Samala came in. So you look up and down the free agent depth chart of significant contributors guaranteed to be on the roster guys, a lot of them have an injury risk. So to put an extra guy, in this case, Quan Alexander, into a room that already had Holcomb and Roberts, who are coming off of injury risk, it makes a ton of sense to add the guy from that standpoint just to hedge your risk. But this is an opportunity, thinking back to the movie Moneyball, where the Steelers are seeing a spot where the league is devaluing these guys, and we have a chance to jump in a ton of high upside. It's how we got Darnell Washington in the third round when we really had no right of getting him, had there been no injury risk. The second major thing, which goes in line with Darnell Washington, is the Pittsburgh Steelers made themselves physical and big. And the way that they've built this team is, in a sense, changing the league in the way that it's going. Yes, the league average per game is 60% passing, 40% running. But particularly because we are in the AFC North and playing the AFC South this year, we have a disproportionate amount of running teams that we are playing this year. Cleveland should be a running team. Baltimore definitely should be a running team, both of which are much better at it than passing. And then Houston, Tennessee, obviously, Colts. And you go through the schedule, we're projected to have one of the highest amount of rushes against us this upcoming season. So bolstering the inside linebacker position with just run thump guys makes a lot of sense. Now, sticking with Con with the second major bullet point that he did this year that other teams are afraid to do, he is signing people to low guarantee, short tenure contracts. And I believe that the 2-year contract is the absolute best model in the NFL, especially when it's only 25% or less of the total value is guaranteed. So not to nerd out on you here real quick, but here's the reason why. Part one, if the guy ends up being a total and utter bust, it's not really that big of a deal because the cap hit is only going to be 12% of it affecting you next year. So it's not a big deal. The second part is, if he does end up having a contract type year and goes crazy in the new situation, he's already with you next year. You don't have to fight against him in open waters free agency compared to if you did a 1-year deal with the player. And then obviously, because it's only a 2-year deal, the total value of the contract and therefore the size of the signing bonus is much less. This is why a 2-year deal is vastly superior to a 1-year deal. It does not give you as much long-term flexibility to reduce the cap, but it also gives you the ability that if the guy isn't right, you're not married to him. And that is the element that the Steelers have in the Steelers way that a lot of teams don't have. We're a very attractive destination, mostly because of Coach Tomlin, for players to want to stay here after they've been part of the Tomlin way. It is very rare that you see someone leaving this city in an area where they hate the Steeler way. Like, it's blunt. You have to go all the way back that far. And when you look at all of the other players who have left for various reasons, it's a very small minority and it's an outlier. So when we look at this, players want to stay with Tomlin. And that's a fact of life. This defense is built upon greatness. Now, there are some players that come here because of that, and we just didn't have any free agent money, right? Because when you're spending your quarterback, you don't have money in terms of cap to distribute elsewhere. And this hits on one third point that I just kind of stumbled into that I wasn't going to make in today's episode, but I do want to say it now that I brought it up. Measuring the value of a team just by the amount of cap money they're spending on either side of the ball is 100% the most intellectually dishonest way to evaluate what a team is about. Yes, the Pittsburgh Steelers are spending way more money on defense than offense. No dispute. It's a fact of life. But when you look at the draft capital that's spent, it's much more on the offensive side. The number one deterrent about why we're spending less on offense, our quarterback is on a rookie deal. End of discussion. We have one of the cheapest quarterback rooms in the NFL, and that's the most expensive position in football. So that's naturally how you get it lower. By the way, the second most expensive position is edge rusher. We have two elite ones at that. So it's a good thing that we're investing in this. A very, very good thing. Now to the other thing that I want to talk about this episode, the actual linebacker room itself, now that Kwon Alexander is in it. As I mentioned before, all three of these guys have an injury situation going with them. All three of them are, quite frankly, poor against the pass. All three of them are allowing 10 yards per completion when the ball is thrown their way. All three of them are allowing 75% or more completion rate when the ball is thrown their way. And this is based on just last year's stats. Now, the trade-off is all three of them are coming from defenses that ran a different system. So when we look at what they were doing in Washington, they couldn't stop anything to save their life. There was no talent on that team aside from aside from Roberts, and just you can't make a good defense with only two or three parts. It's just not possible. And when we look at Holcomb in Miami, that whole team kind of got in disarray, dysfunction. But at the end of the day, he got hurt, so that's part of it. And Alexander, coming from the Jets, did have a good defense, but there's also a segment when you have a good defense, you don't normally let pieces go that are super attractive. So there is a disconnect somewhere that's going on there that's beyond his injury history. So, because clearly the Jets do not have a problem bringing in a diva. So when we look at this overall, the giant fear of coverage does need to make itself known. And the other thing that needs to make itself known is that this early in the training camp, they clearly were expecting some of the development in terms of health recovery from the other two, particularly Roberts. And after evaluating them a couple of days, it's when you can say, we knew what he was in minicamp. He didn't heal as much as we thought he was going to in June. This makes sense. Now, the Steelers are initially saying it's as a depth piece. Well, part of that is because they haven't said who's the starter. So technically all of their linebackers are depth pieces at this point. Is it possible that Alexander wins out this job? Absolutely. Tomlin loves competition, and they're fighting with three injured people. To a degree of this is who will be healthiest the fastest is going to be the front runner to win this job. So when we look at this, Steelers Nation, we're in a great spot. Quan has built an amazing roster and is continuing to do so. I look forward to following up with you guys as camp goes on. You guys enjoy training camp. It's going to be a great season. And here we go, Steelers. Here we go.